Doctor moved her 6 arms across the ancient stone tablet, feeling the rough surface with her sensitive fingertips. The symbols carved into the black rock were old, very old. Her people had been exploring space for 30,000 years, but these markings were twice that age. The dusty chamber deep beneath the ruins of Prime held dozens of such tablets. They belonged to the predecessors, a mysterious race that had vanished 50,000 years ago. Most scientists thought the predecessors had died in some natural disaster. Doctor was starting to think they were wrong. She had spent 5 years translating their language. The work was slow and difficult. The predecessors wrote in symbols that changed meaning based on context. A single mark could mean water, life, or danger, depending on what symbols surrounded it. Today, she was working on a tablet that made her nervous. The symbols were different from the others. They seemed urgent, like a warning someone had carved in a hurry. Her translation device beeped softly. Another symbol decoded. Doctor read the growing message on her screen and felt her 4 hearts beat faster. "Beware the children of Saul," the message began. "We thought we knew war, we thought we knew strength, we were fools." Doctor paused. Saul was the name of the star where humans came from, but this tablet was carved 50,000 years ago. Humans had only discovered space travel 200 years ago. How could the predecessors have known about them? She continued translating. The next part made even less sense. "They appear peaceful, they speak of rules and mercy. They show kindness to prisoners and protect the weak. Do not believe this. We made this mistake. It cost us everything." The tablet went on to describe humans in ways that confused Doctor. The predecessors called humans the inheritors of war itself, and those who make peace only to prepare for greater conflicts. They wrote about human efficiency in a way that seemed to terrify them. But the humans Doctor knew were not terrifying. They were friendly neighbors in the Galactic Council. They had been part of galactic civilization for 200 years. Yes, they were more military-minded than most species, but they always followed the rules of war. They protected civilians. They took prisoners instead of killing defeated enemies. They even helped rebuild worlds they had fought over. The human military was strong, but nothing special. They had fought border wars with the Empire and the clans. They had won some battles and lost others. When they won, they were generous in victory. When they lost, they accepted defeat gracefully and paid their war debts. Doctor had met many humans during her research. They were curious about predecessor ruins and often funded her expeditions. Ambassador Sarah had personally approved the funding for this dig. Doctor found humans to be polite, helpful, and surprisingly emotional for such a warlike species. The tablet continued with more warnings that made no sense. Never threaten their young, never attack their civilians, never make them remember what they were before they learned restraint. They have forgotten their true nature, and we pray they never remember it. Doctor set down her tools and walked to the chamber's entrance. Outside, her research team was setting up camp. 3 species worked together, her own, some researchers, and 2 human graduate students. She watched the humans work. James was a big man with gentle hands who carefully brushed dirt from pottery fragments. Maria was smaller but moved with quick precision as she finds. Both wore the simple clothes of academics, not soldiers. These were the terrifying beings the predecessors warned about. James had cried yesterday when they found the skeleton of what looked like a predecessor child. Maria shared her food with anyone who looked hungry. Doctor returned to the tablet. The final section was the strangest part. "We showed them our fleets. We showed them our weapons. We thought this would prove our strength. Instead, they asked us why we needed so many ships for so few worlds. When we could not answer, they showed us what efficiency means. They showed us what strength looks like when it serves purpose instead of pride. They did not destroy us with anger. They did not conquer us with cruelty. They simply optimized us out of existence. By the time we understood what was happening, we had already lost. They were not cruel, they were thorough. We flee now to the dark spaces between galaxies. Perhaps there we can hide until they forget we existed. If others read this, remember, never wake the sleeping Earth. Never remind them who they used to be." Doctor sat back in her chair. The translation made no sense. The predecessors had been the most advanced civilization in galactic history. Their technology was still beyond what modern species could build. Their fleets had numbered in the millions. How could a primitive species from Earth have defeated them? But as she looked at the tablet again, she noticed something else. Carbon dating put these symbols at exactly 50,000 years old. That matched perfectly with when the predecessors vanished. And according to human historical records, 50,000 years ago was when their species had gone through something called the Great Unification. Human historians described it as the end of tribal warfare on Earth. Different human groups had finally learned to work together instead of fighting each other. It was supposed to be when humans became civilized. Doctor pulled up human historical files on her computer. The records were sparse. Humans did not like to talk about their past before space travel. They said their early history was not relevant to modern galactic civilization. But reading between the lines, Doctor could see hints of something darker. Humans mentioned resource optimization and conflict resolution protocols. They spoke of learning efficiency through necessity and the importance of proportional response. These did not sound like the words of a primitive species learning to be civilized. They sounded like the words of a species that had become very, very good at warfare. Doctor looked outside again at James and Maria. They worked with the same calm efficiency she saw in all humans. They never wasted motion. They never used more force than necessary. They achieved their goals with minimal effort. Suddenly, the predecessor warning did not seem so crazy. Maybe humans were not a young species learning to fight. Maybe they were an old species that had learned to stop fighting. The question was, what would happen if someone made them remember how? Admiral Grex stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue-green planet grow larger on the screen. New Eden was a beautiful world. Rolling green hills covered most of the main continent. Vast oceans sparkled under the light of its star. It would make a fine addition to the Empire. The planet held 3 million human civilians, mostly farmers and their families. They had been watching New Eden for months, studying its defenses. The humans had only a small security force. No military ships, no orbital weapons. It would be an easy conquest. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from the planet." "Put it on screen," Admiral Grex ordered. A middle-aged human woman appeared on the. She wore simple farm clothes and looked tired. Behind her, Grex could see other humans moving around with quiet purpose. "I am Governor Martinez of New Eden," the woman said. Her voice was calm and steady. "I assume you are here about our territorial dispute." Admiral Grex laughed. Dispute? There was no dispute. The Empire had decided to take this system. The humans could surrender or die. "Governor Martinez," he said, "you will evacuate all human personnel from this system within 24 hours. Any who remain will be considered hostile combatants." Governor Martinez nodded slowly. "I understand your position, Admiral. However, we cannot abandon our homes. We have children here. Elderly relatives, people who cannot travel." "That is not my concern," Admiral Grex replied. "You have 24 hours. The transmission ended. Admiral Grex turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare the landing forces. We will give them their 24 hours, then we take the planet." But something strange happened over the next day. Long-range sensors showed the humans were indeed evacuating, but not in the chaotic panic Grex expected. Instead, families moved in organized groups to underground shelters that seemed to appear overnight. Equipment disappeared into hidden storage areas. Children were taken to secure locations with the same calm efficiency adults used for everything else. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "the humans appear to have underground facilities across the entire planet. The life signs are disappearing from the surface, but the total population count remains the same." Admiral Grex frowned. When had the humans built so many shelters? Intelligence reports said New Eden was just a farming colony. Where had they found the resources for planet-wide bunker systems? When the 24 hours ended, Admiral Grex sent down his invasion forces. 10,000 soldiers in atmospheric fighters and ground vehicles. They should have been able to conquer the planet in a few hours. Instead, they ran into problems immediately. The first surprise was the roads. Every major highway had been blocked with what looked like farm equipment. Tractors and harvesters positioned to create perfect defensive positions. The blocks looked random, but they forced vehicles into narrow channels where they could be attacked easily. The second surprise was the humans who stayed behind to fight. They were not soldiers. Files showed they were teachers, mechanics, shopkeepers, and farmers, but they fought with a coordination that impressed even Admiral Grex. A group of 8 humans held off 200 soldiers for 6 hours. They used hunting rifles and farming tools, but their tactics were flawless. They knew exactly when to retreat and when to attack. They communicated without radio chatter that intelligence could intercept. When the forces finally overran the human position, they found something disturbing. The humans had been recording everything. Small cameras captured detailed footage of equipment, tactics, and communications. The humans had not been fighting to win. They had been fighting to learn. "Sir," Colonel reported from the surface, "we have secured the primary settlement, but we have lost 40% of our invasion force. The humans fought like they knew exactly what we were going to do before we did it." "Impossible," Admiral Grex said. "They are farmers. Farmers who somehow prepared underground shelters for 3 million people without us noticing," Colonel replied. "Farmers who knew exactly where to place roadblocks for maximum tactical advantage. Farmers who recorded detailed intelligence on our equipment while they were dying." Admiral Grex studied the tactical reports. The humans had indeed fought with impossible knowledge of doctrine. They knew which weapons worked best against armor. They knew how units communicated. They knew standard assault patterns. It was as if the humans had been preparing for this exact invasion for years. 3 weeks later, New Eden was under control. The remaining human defenders had been killed or captured. The underground shelters had been found and their inhabitants relocated to detention centers. By all military standards, the invasion was a success. But Admiral Grex felt uneasy. His forces had taken heavy casualties fighting farmers with hunting rifles. Worse, the humans had shown no anger during their defeat. Even as prisoners, they remained calm and polite. They answered questions about their defensive preparations with helpful honesty. "We have been practicing emergency evacuations since the colony was founded," Governor Martinez explained during her interrogation. "It is standard procedure for Outer Rim settlements." "For 15 years?" Admiral Grex asked. "You have been practicing for 15 years?" "Of course," Governor Martinez replied. "Earth's colonial administration requires all settlements to maintain emergency preparedness. We practice evacuation drills every month and defensive scenarios every season." Admiral Grex found this hard to believe. What kind of people practiced for war while claiming to be peaceful farmers? But the most disturbing thing was what happened after the battle. Intelligence officers reviewed the human recordings and found something impossible. The cameras had not just recorded the fighting. They had recorded detailed analysis of weaknesses. Voices on the recordings discussed optimal targeting points on vehicles. They noted communication delays in command structure. They identified patterns in tactical doctrine that could be exploited. The humans had not just been recording intelligence. They had been conducting a detailed military analysis while under fire. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "these recordings are more comprehensive than anything our own military analysts have produced. The humans identified vulnerabilities in our equipment that we did not know existed." Admiral Grex looked at the files. Page after page of detailed observations, precise measurements of armor thickness, calculations of weapon effectiveness, timing analyses of communication delays. This was not the work of desperate farmers fighting for their lives. This was the work of experienced military minds conducting a professional evaluation. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we are receiving a transmission from Earth." "Put it through," Admiral Grex ordered. A human male appeared on the screen. He wore a simple dark suit and had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Admiral Grex," the man said politely, "I am Secretary Harrison from Earth's Department of External Affairs. I believe we need to discuss recent events at New Eden." "There is nothing to discuss," Admiral Grex replied. "The planet is now under control." Secretary Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I understand that. However, I wanted to inform you that Earth's government is implementing what we call Escalation Protocol 7 in response to your actions." "What does that mean?" Admiral Grex asked. Secretary Harrison's expression remained pleasant and calm. "It means, Admiral, that you have just made a very serious mistake. Have a good day." The transmission ended. Admiral Grex stared at the blank screen, wondering what Escalation Protocol 7 meant. He would find out soon enough. Council President watched the holographic display with growing confusion. The map showed human space, but something was wrong. All across the outer regions, human colonies were disappearing. Not destroyed, disappearing. "Explain this again," she said to her intelligence chief. Commander adjusted the display. "Madam President, 6 months ago, humans controlled 437 systems. Today, they control only 28. They conquered that many systems so quickly." "No, ma'am, they have taken only 12 systems. The rest, the humans just left." President stared at the map. Human space had shrunk to a tiny cluster around Earth. It made no sense. Humanity had spent 2 centuries building their interstellar civilization. Why would they abandon everything? "Are they retreating to Earth for defense?" she asked. "We don't think so," Commander replied. "Our observers report that human colonies are conducting orderly evacuations. They're moving people and equipment in perfect organization. No panic, no chaos. They're even leaving behind gifts for species that help with the evacuations." This was not normal behavior for a species under attack. Most civilizations fought desperately to hold their territory. Refugees fled in terror while their military made desperate last stands. The humans were doing something else entirely. "What about their fleet?" President asked. "That's the strange part. Human warships are not engaging forces. Instead, they're providing escort for civilian evacuations. They fight only when directly attacked, and then only long enough to complete the evacuation." President called up reports from Council observers in human space. The stories were all similar. Human colonies received evacuation orders and immediately. Families packed efficiently and left for designated transport points. Industrial facilities shut down in orderly sequence. But the most puzzling thing was what the humans left behind. "They're not destroying anything," she murmured, reading one report. "Factories, mines, orbital stations, everything is just abandoned." "Yes, ma'am, completely intact. Some observers report that human facilities are still operating on automatic." President pulled up footage from the evacuation of Genesis Colony. She watched families board transport ships with calm efficiency. Children carried small bags of personal items. Adults moved with purpose but no fear. It looked more like a planned relocation than a desperate retreat. "Madam President," her aide interrupted, "Ambassador is here for her scheduled meeting." Sarah entered the office with her usual warm smile. The human ambassador wore a simple blue dress and carried a small briefcase. She looked completely relaxed despite her civilization's apparent collapse. "Ambassador," President began carefully, "we need to discuss recent events in human space." "Of course," Sarah replied, settling into her chair. "I assume you're wondering about the implementation of Escalation Protocol 7. Your people are abandoning hundreds of worlds. This Protocol 7 seems to be a complete retreat." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I understand why it looks that way. May I show you something?" The human ambassador opened her briefcase and pulled out a small data pad. She activated a holographic display that showed human space from a different perspective. "This is what human space looked like 6 months ago," Sarah said. The display showed a complex web of colonies, trade routes, and defensive positions. As you can see, it was very scattered, difficult to defend, inefficient to supply. The display changed. This is human space now. President saw the 28 systems arranged in a tight cluster, but the new view showed things the Council intelligence maps had missed. The systems were connected by high-speed communication networks. Defensive positions formed interlocking fields of fire. Industrial capacity was concentrated for maximum efficiency. "You're not retreating," President realized. "You're consolidating." "Escalation Protocol 7 calls for strategic simplification," Sarah explained. "We found our civilization had become too spread out, too many vulnerable points, too much waste in our logistics." "But you're abandoning hundreds of worlds. Your people spent generations building." Sarah's expression grew sad. "Yes, that part is unfortunate, but Protocol 7 requires us to prioritize efficiency over sentimentality." President studied the display. The new human space looked small, but it also looked incredibly strong. Every system had redundant defenses. Every trade route had multiple backup options. Every industrial facility connected to a networked production system. "What about the facilities you left behind?" she asked. "Still operating," Sarah said simply. Automated factories continue production, mining stations still extract resources, agricultural centers keep growing food. But there are no humans running them. Humans built very good automated systems. The facilities will continue working for many years. President frowned. Working for who? Sarah smiled politely. For whoever needs their products, of course. We left detailed operating manuals in galactic standard languages. Any species can use the facilities we left behind. This made even less sense. Why would humans abandon valuable infrastructure and then give it away for free? Ambassador, President said slowly, this sounds less like a military retreat and more like preparation for something else, Sarah finished. Yes, that would be accurate. Preparation for what? Sarah consulted her data pad. I'm not authorized to discuss the details of protocols beyond 7, but I can tell you that our preliminary response phase is nearly complete. Preliminary response. The Empire attacked our civilians, Sarah explained, her voice still pleasant but somehow colder. Earth's government has determined that an appropriate response is required. President felt a chill run down her spine. How appropriate? Proportional to the threat posed, Sarah replied. Earth's military analysts are still calculating the exact scope of response required. They made this somewhat complicated by involving civilian targets. What does that mean? Sarah stood and closed her briefcase. It means, Madam President, that the Empire has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their conflict with humanity. I don't understand. They seem to think they are fighting a war with us. They are not fighting a war. They are being evaluated. President stared at the human ambassador. Evaluated for what? Sarah walked toward the door, then paused. For whether they represent a continued threat to human civilian populations, the evaluation period is nearly complete. And if they fail this evaluation? Sarah's smile was as warm and friendly as ever. Then they will be optimized. What does that mean? But Sarah was already leaving. Have a wonderful day, Madam President. Please give my regards to your family. After the human ambassador left, President sat alone with the holographic display. She studied the tight cluster of human systems and thought about Sarah's words. Optimized, the humans were going to optimize the Empire. President remembered her conversation with Doctor about the predecessor ruins. The archaeologist had mentioned something about humans showing the predecessors what efficiency means. Looking at the new configuration of human space, President began to understand what that might have meant. The humans had not been retreating, they had been preparing. The question now was, preparing for what? She had a terrible feeling the galaxy was about to find out. Admiral Grex woke to alarms screaming throughout his flagship. Emergency lights bathed the command bridge in red as officers shouted reports across the noise. Sir, multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Defense grid is offline. Communications array destroyed. Admiral Grex stumbled to his command chair, still groggy from sleep. Report, what's happening? His tactical officer's voice shook with confusion. Sir, we're under attack by human forces, but the readings don't make sense. Show me. The main screen displayed the space around Prime, the Empire's capital world. Grex saw his defensive fleet in normal formation around the planet, but moving between them were ships that didn't look like anything he had seen before. They were clearly human in design, but wrong. Too smooth, too fast. They moved with impossible precision through formations that should have taken hours to coordinate. How many ships? Grex demanded. We're not sure, sir. Sensors show approximately 200 human vessels, but they're moving in perfect formation across 6 light hours of space. That was impossible. No fleet could coordinate across such distances. The time delay for communications alone would make it hopeless. Sir, his communications officer called out, I'm receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. The screen showed a middle-aged human man in a simple military uniform. He looked tired but professional. Admiral Grex, the human said, this is Fleet Admiral of the Earth Defense Force. I am authorized to offer you terms for immediate surrender. Surrender? Grex laughed. You have 200 ships against my fleet of 800. You're outnumbered 4-1. Admiral nodded politely. Yes, sir. I understand the numbers seem favorable to you. However, there are several factors you may not have considered. Such as, first, you are no longer fighting the same humans you defeated at New Eden. Second, we have spent the last 6 months optimizing our approach to this conflict. Third, your evaluation period has concluded. The human admiral consulted a data pad. Based on our analysis, the Empire poses a continued threat to human civilian populations. Therefore, Earth's government has authorized the implementation of Escalation Protocol 23. Admiral Grex felt cold fear creep up his spine. If Protocol 7 had been humanity's retreat, what was Protocol 23? What does that mean? He asked. It means, Admiral, that your empire will be restructured to eliminate its capacity for aggression against civilian targets. You mean conquered? No, sir, I mean optimized. The communication ended. Admiral Grex turned to his tactical officer. All ships attack formation, destroy the human fleet. But as his fleet moved to engage, something impossible happened. The human ships didn't just respond to movements. They anticipated them. When Admiral Grex ordered his left flank to advance, human ships were already moving to counter the maneuver. When he tried to concentrate fire on individual human vessels, they had already repositioned to mutual support positions. It was as if the humans could see the future. Sir, his tactical officer reported, voice full of confusion. The humans are executing counter-maneuvers before we issue our orders. That's impossible. Yes, sir, but they're doing it anyway. Admiral Grex watched in growing horror as his carefully planned formations fell apart. Every tactic he tried, the humans had already prepared for. Every weakness he tried to exploit, they had already reinforced. Worse, the human weapons were far more advanced than intelligence had suggested. Beams that cut through armor like paper. Missiles that somehow curved around defensive fire. Shields that seemed to absorb everything that could throw at them. In 2 hours, Admiral Grex lost half his fleet. In 4 hours, he had no choice but to order retreat. But the humans didn't let him retreat. Sir, his navigation officer reported, hyperspace engines are not responding. What do you mean? Something is blocking our hyperspace field generators. We can't jump to light speed. Admiral Grex looked at his sensor display. The human fleet had somehow deployed devices that prevented hyperspace travel. His ships were trapped in normal space with enemies that could predict their every move. All ships, he broadcast, prepare for final battle. If we must die, we die with honor. But the response from Admiral surprised him. Admiral Grex, you are not required to die today. Please review the terms we transmitted to your ship. Admiral Grex found the human message in his system. He read it with growing amazement. The humans were not demanding unconditional surrender. Instead, they were offering a complete restructuring of society. They would remove the Empire's military leadership and replace it with a civilian government. They would dismantle offensive weapons but leave defensive systems intact. They would establish trade relationships and provide technological assistance. Most surprising of all, they promised that no civilians would be harmed and that culture would be preserved. It was less like surrender terms and more like a business proposal. This is a trick, Admiral Grex muttered. But as he read the detailed plans, he realized it wasn't a trick. It was exactly what the humans had said, optimization. They were proposing to reorganize civilization to eliminate its aggressive tendencies while preserving everything else. Sir, his communications officer called out, we're receiving reports from across the Empire. Human fleets have appeared simultaneously at every major world. How many fleets? All of them, sir. Every military base, every industrial center, every government world. Human ships appeared everywhere at the same time. Admiral Grex stared at the tactical display. The scale of coordination required for such an operation was beyond anything he had imagined. The humans had somehow positioned fleets at hundreds of worlds and launched simultaneous attacks across thousands of light years. No species in galactic history had demonstrated such organizational capability. Sir, his aide reported quietly, the Emperor is requesting immediate communication. Emperor appeared on the screen. The ruler of the Empire looked older than Admiral Grex remembered. His scales had lost their shine and his eyes showed fear. Admiral, the Emperor said, I have just received surrender terms from the humans. They are unusual. Unusual how, my emperor? They are not demanding tribute or subjugation. They are offering to help us restructure our government to be more efficient and less aggressive. They say they have no interest in ruling us, only in ensuring we never again attack civilian populations. Admiral Grex found this hard to believe. What if we refuse? Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Admiral, they have demonstrated complete control of our space. They have disabled our fleets without destroying them. They have offered terms that preserve our people and our culture while only requiring changes to our military policies. Yes, my emperor, but what if we refuse? They showed me projections, Admiral. Computer models of what would happen if we continued to resist. According to their calculations, continued resistance would result in the complete collapse of our civilization within 18 months. Admiral Grex felt sick. They threatened genocide. No, Admiral, they explained logistics. They showed me how our economy would fail under continued military pressure, how our supply lines would collapse, how our population would suffer from resource shortages. They were not threatening to destroy us. They were explaining how our destruction would occur naturally if we forced them to maintain military pressure. The Emperor continued. They offered to prevent this outcome by helping us transition to a more sustainable form of government. They called it optimization for long-term stability. Admiral Grex realized what was happening. The humans were not conquering the Empire. They were reorganizing it, like a business that had been bought by a more efficient company. What are your orders, my Emperor? Emperor sighed. Accept their terms, Admiral. It appears we have been outcompeted. Doctor stood in the emergency session of the Galactic Council, watching representatives from dozens of species argue in growing panic. The great assembly hall buzzed with nervous energy as delegates tried to understand what had happened to the Empire. Order, Council President called out. Doctor, please share your findings with the Council. Doctor approached the central podium, carrying her tablet with the complete predecessor translation. Around her, representatives fell silent. Everyone knew she had been studying the ancient warnings about humanity. Honored delegates, she began, I have completed my translation of the predecessor archives. The warnings about humanity were not myths or propaganda. They were historical records. She activated the holographic display, showing the reconstructed timeline. 50,000 years ago, the predecessor civilization encountered humanity during what human records call the Great Unification. The predecessors made the same mistake they just made. What mistake? Asked the delegate. They assumed human military restraint was weakness. They assumed human rules of war were limitations. They were wrong on both counts. Doctor changed the display to show human space before and after the recent conflict. What we witnessed was not a war. It was a demonstration. Humanity showed the galaxy what they are capable of when they stop limiting themselves. The representative raised a tentacled arm. But the humans were peaceful for 2 centuries. We know their history. No, Doctor replied. We know the history they chose to share. According to the complete predecessor records, humans spent 50,000 years perfecting warfare on Earth before they achieved space travel. The Great Unification was not about learning to be peaceful. It was about becoming so efficient at conflict that continued warfare would have destroyed their planet. She pulled up new data from the recent conflict. Observe how they restructured the Empire. No unnecessary destruction. No civilian casualties. No cultural suppression. They simply removed the Empire's ability to threaten others while preserving everything else. That sounds reasonable, said the delegate. Yes, Doctor agreed. It is perfectly reasonable. That is what makes it terrifying. She changed the display again. The predecessors described human warfare as optimization. Humans do not fight with emotion or cruelty. They fight like engineers solving a problem. The problem was aggression. The solution was to restructure society to eliminate aggression while maintaining all other functions. Ambassador Sarah entered the assembly hall during Doctor's presentation. The human representative looked as calm and friendly as always, but now everyone in the room watched her with new understanding. Ambassador, President called out, perhaps you could answer some questions about recent events. Sarah took her usual seat among the delegates. Of course, Madam President, I'm happy to clarify anything that seems confusing. The fleet coordination your people demonstrated. President began carefully, simultaneous operations across hundreds of light years. How is such coordination possible? Preparation and practice, Sarah replied simply. Earth's military has been developing large-scale coordination protocols for many years. The recent operation was well within our established capabilities. For how many years? Doctor asked. Sarah consulted her data pad. The current coordination system has been in development for approximately 12,000 years, with major updates every few centuries as our understanding improved. The assembly hall fell completely silent. 12,000 years of military development. Ambassador, the delegate said slowly, your species has been preparing for warfare for 12,000 years. Oh, much longer than that, Sarah corrected. The current system is just our most recent version. Earth's military doctrine has been under continuous development since the Great Unification 50,000 years ago. Doctor felt her 4 hearts beating rapidly. What exactly was the Great Unification? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. It was when humanity realized that unrestricted conflict between human groups would eventually destroy our species, so we developed protocols for managing conflict in more efficient ways. You mean you learned to be peaceful? No, Sarah said, we learned to be precise. She stood and activated her own holographic display. Peace implies the absence of conflict. Humans did not eliminate conflict, we optimized it. The display showed Earth's history from a perspective no other species had seen. Thousands of years of continuous warfare, but warfare that became increasingly efficient and focused. Conflicts that achieved specific objectives with minimal waste. Military organizations that grew more sophisticated over. By the time we reached space, Sarah explained, humanity had developed the most advanced military science in galactic history. We had tested every strategy, refined every tactic, optimized every system. But you seemed peaceful when you joined galactic civilization, President protested. We were polite, Sarah corrected. Politeness is a form of efficiency. It achieves social objectives with minimal conflict. Doctor understood now. The rules of war, the protection of civilians, the diplomatic protocols, those weren't limitations on your military capability. Those were applications of it. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Protecting civilians prevents insurgencies. Following rules of war builds trust with allies. Diplomatic protocols resolve conflicts before they require military solutions. All of these practices make warfare more efficient. The ambassador, newly arrived after his government's restructuring, stood up. Then, why did you not conquer the galaxy immediately? Sarah looked puzzled. Why would we want to conquer the galaxy? Power, resources, territory. We already have access to all the resources we need through trade. We have territory sufficient for our population. And power, Sarah paused thoughtfully. Power is the ability to achieve your objectives. Our objective is the long-term prosperity of human civilization. Conquering the galaxy would not serve that objective. But you conquered us, the ambassador pointed out. No, Sarah replied, we optimized you. The empire was structured in a way that created unnecessary conflict. We restructured it to eliminate the source of conflict while preserving everything else. Your people are happier now. Your economy is more efficient. Your culture is preserved. Doctor realized the full horror of the situation. You are not conquerors, you are gardeners. Sarah smiled. That's a lovely metaphor. Yes, I suppose we are like gardeners. We prefer environments that are stable and productive. When we find systems that create unnecessary conflict or inefficiency, we adjust them. What if a species refuses to be adjusted? President asked quietly. Sarah's expression grew sad. That would be unfortunate. Fortunately, it rarely happens. Most species prefer prosperity and stability to conflict and suffering. But if it did happen, then we would implement higher-numbered protocols, Sarah replied. Currently, our highest protocol is Protocol 53. What does Protocol 53 involve? Complete reorganization of a civilization from the foundation level up. New government, new economic system, new social structure. Everything rebuilt according to optimized principles. Doctor asked the question everyone was thinking. Has Protocol 53 ever been implemented? Once, Sarah said quietly. 50,000 years ago, the predecessors required complete reorganization. You didn't drive them from the galaxy, Doctor realized. You reorganized them. Into what? President whispered. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Into us. The predecessors became the foundation for modern human civilization. Their technology, their knowledge, their culture. All of it was preserved and integrated into human society. The assembly hall was completely silent. The predecessors are not extinct, Sarah continued. They are part of humanity now. Their descendants live on Earth alongside original human populations. Their histories are preserved in our archives. Their achievements are celebrated in our culture. Doctor felt the universe shift around her. How many other species? 17 over the past 50,000 years, all facing extinction from their own inefficiencies, all preserved through integration into human civilization. Sarah looked around the assembly hall at the representatives of dozens of species. This is why Earth's government prefers lower-numbered protocols. Integration is possible but traumatic. It's much better for everyone if civilizations can optimize themselves with minimal assistance. She returned to her seat. I hope that clarifies any questions about recent events. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We simply prefer galactic civilization to function efficiently. President found her voice. What happens now? Now, Sarah replied, we return to normal galactic operations. Trade continues. Diplomacy continues. Cultural exchange continues. The only difference is that aggressive civilizations will be offered assistance in restructuring themselves before they cause problems. And if they refuse assistance? Sarah's smile was as warm and friendly as always. Madam President, do you know what our most advanced military protocols are designed to accomplish? What? The preservation of galactic civilization through the elimination of inefficient conflict. We have been working toward this goal for 50,000 years. We are very good at it. Doctor looked around the assembly hall at delegates who were only now beginning to understand what they had been living alongside for 2 centuries. Humanity had not been a young species learning to join galactic civilization. They had been an ancient species waiting for galactic civilization to mature. The waiting period was over.